All right, so it looks like our listeners are getting ready for the IELTS,
Yeah.
and specifically, they're working on the listening section. So
Right.
we're going to deep dive into that today and try to give them all the tips and tricks they need to totally crush this thing.
Sounds good.
We've got some great resources from IELTS Liz.
Oh, yeah. She's great.
She's like a total pro when it comes to IELTS.
Definitely. Yeah.
So, it's interesting because the listening section of the IELTS isn't just about understanding what you hear.
It's true.
It's like a mental obstacle course, right?
Yeah, like they're really testing your multitasking and your concentration.
Right.
And like how fast you can think on your feet.
Yeah, and you've got that clock just ticking away in the background.
Totally adds to the pressure.
Okay, so first things first.
Okay.
What does this test actually look like?
Okay, so the test itself is 40 minutes long.
Okay.
But only 30 minutes of that is actually spent listening.
Gotcha.
Then you get some extra time to transfer your answers over
Okay.
or, just double check everything.
Right. And that kind of depends on whether you're taking the paper-based or the computer-based test.
Makes sense.
But here's something interesting.
Okay.
Both the academic and the general training candidates take the same listening test.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
It is.
But speaking of things that people might not know, IELTS, Liz talks about how a lot of people kind of get thrown off by the different accents in the recordings.
That's true.
It's not just British English.
No, it's a mix.
Right.
You'll hear Australian accents, American, Canadian,
Wow.
all sorts of accents.
So it's like you're training your ears to be multilingual.
Yeah, kind of.
Even if you're just focusing on English.
Right.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's all about being prepared for that global stage.
Okay, so are there any other kind of like sneaky traps that IELTS Liz warns us about?
Oh, for sure.
Like, what are some of the things that people should watch out for?
Well, one of the biggest ones is just like maintaining your concentration for that full 30 minutes.
It's so easy to lose your place, especially when you're trying to like listen, read, and write all at the same time.
Right. It's like true multitasking mayhem.
Yes.
And then there's like the word limits.
Oh, yeah. Don't get me started on word limits.
Oh, tell me about it.
Trying to like cram a whole paragraph's worth of information into like 2 words or something.
It's the worst.
It's tough.
But, okay, before we get into all of that,
Okay.
what about all the different question types?
Oh, yeah. There are a ton of different question types.
Like, how many are we talking?
You'll see everything from sentence completion and summary completion to multiple choice.
Wow.
And the list goes on and on.
So, like, where do you even begin with all of that?
Well, honestly, the best thing you can do is just practice.
Okay.
And Luz has got some really great practice materials on her website for all the different question types.
Okay, that's good to know.
But one of the biggest things she emphasizes is like really understanding the instructions for each question. Like if it says no more than 2 words and or a number, you have to stick to that.
2 words. That's brutal.
I know, right?
Okay, so how is this whole listening test structured?
Okay, so it's divided into 4 sections.
Good.
And sections 1 and 2 are kind of focused on everyday social situations.
Like what kind of stuff?
Like, maybe booking a hotel.
Okay.
Or like inquiring about a course.
Oh, okay.
Stuff like that.
So it's not all just like lectures and academic stuff.
Not at all.
Okay.
There's definitely some real world relatable content in there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so then what about sections 3 and 4?
So those are a little bit more academic.
Okay.
It's more like, lectures and discussions.
So it kind of ramps up in difficulty.
Yeah, you could say that.
It's like you start with a warm-up jog,
Right.
and then you're sprinting by the end.
Exactly. They want to see how you do in all these different contexts, from like casual conversations to those more complex academic discussions.
This is great. I'm feeling much more prepared already. Any other kind of golden nuggets from IELTS, Liz, before we move on?
Let me think.
Like anything else that you found super helpful?
Well, she really recommends that you like analyze your answers after you take a practice test.
Okay.
And like really go through the transcripts.
Right.
So you can see like where you went wrong.
Okay.
And how to improve.
She's got all those videos on her website too, right?
Tons of videos.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
But with all those different question types and having to like multitask like a pro,
Right.
how do you actually train your brain to do all of that at the same time?
That is the $1 million question.
Right. Like how do you listen, read, and write all at once without having a mental meltdown?
It's a skill for sure.
Okay, so how do we do it?
Well, there are actually some really effective techniques that you can use to get more comfortable with all that mental juggling.
Okay, I am all ears. So, okay, give us the goods. How do we train our brains to multitask during this listening test?
Well, it can feel a bit overwhelming at first. But like any skill, you can definitely get better with practice.
Okay, so like what kind of practice are we talking about?
One technique that works really well is to break down the multitasking into like smaller, more manageable chunks.
Okay, so instead of trying to do everything at once,
Right.
we kind of like break it down step by step.
Exactly. So for example, before the recording even starts,
Okay.
take a moment to just like quickly skim the questions for that section
Okay.
and pay attention to keywords
Right.
and try to anticipate the kind of information you'll need to listen for.
So it's like you're priming your brain to be on the lookout for specific details.
Yeah, like a mental scavenger hunt.
I like that.
Then as you listen to the recording,
Okay.
just try to focus on understanding the main idea
Okay.
of the conversation or the lecture.
Gotcha.
Don't get too hung up on catching every single word.
Right.
Just try to follow the big picture.
Okay, so get the gist first.
Right.
And then zero in on those specific details
Exactly.
that are relevant to the questions.
Precisely. Think of it like having a mental zoom lens, you know?
Oh, okay.
You can adjust your focus as needed.
I like that.
You know, going from the wide shot to the close-up.
That's a great analogy.
And as you get more comfortable with this process, you can start to integrate the writing element more smoothly.
Okay, so like writing down answers as we listen
Yeah.
instead of waiting till the end of the section.
Exactly. But don't try to write down everything you hear.
Okay,
Just jot down like keywords or phrases that will help you remember the information later.
gotcha.
It takes practice to find the right balance. So don't get discouraged if you feel a bit clumsy at first.
Right, so it's all about finding your own multitasking rhythm.
Exactly. Figuring out what works best for you.
Okay, that makes sense.
And remember, it's okay to make mistakes along the way. The more you practice, the better you'll become at juggling all those tasks effectively.
That's good to know because I think a lot of people get kind of intimidated by that whole multitasking aspect.
I know it can be scary.
Okay, so let's talk a bit more about those tricky question types.
Okay.
I know IELTS Liz provides a ton of practice materials on her website,
Oh, yeah, she's got some great stuff.
which is amazing.
Yeah, she breaks down each question type and gives you like specific tips and strategies.
Okay, so let's say someone's really struggling with those sentence completion questions.
Okay.
What kind of advice does she give?
Well, one of the biggest things she emphasizes is the importance of understanding the grammar
Okay.
and the syntax of the sentence.
Right.
You can often predict the type of word or phrase that's missing just based on the structure of the sentence itself.
So it's not just about hearing the right words.
Right.
It's about understanding how those words fit into the sentence grammatically.
Exactly. It's like being a language detective.
I love that.
And she also reminds you to pay attention to that word limit.
Right?
If it says no more than 2 words, you better stick to that.
2 words is brutal,
I know, right?
but fair.
Yeah, it's all part of the game.
And speaking of games, paraphrasing seems to be like a major player in the IELTS listening test.
It is a big one.
So how can we get better at recognizing those reworded phrases?
Well, one helpful strategy is to pay attention to synonyms and antonyms.
Okay.
You know, the speakers might use different words to express the same idea,
Right.
so you need to be able to make those connections on the fly.
So it's like having a mental thesaurus
Exactly.
ready to access at a moment's notice.
And it also helps to be aware of common paraphrasing techniques,
Okay, like what?
like changing the grammatical structure of a sentence or using different examples to illustrate the same point.
So it's not just about swapping out individual words.
Right.
It's about recognizing those broader shifts in meaning and structure.
Exactly.
So it's like learning a whole new level of language.
And the more you practice, the better you'll become at anticipating those paraphrasing tricks.
Okay.
You'll start to see the patterns and think like the test makers.
It's almost like learning to decipher a code.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay, so what about those multiple choice questions?
Yes.
Those can be tricky
They can be.
because they often include some really convincing distractors.
They do. They're designed to test your ability to really differentiate
Right.
between very subtle shades of meaning.
So how do we avoid falling for those traps?
Well, the first step is to read the question and the answer choices carefully
Okay.
before the recording even starts,
Okay.
and try to predict what the speakers might discuss.
So it's like setting up a mental framework for the conversation before it even begins.
Exactly. And then as you listen,
Okay.
pay close attention to keywords
Right.
and phrases that might signal the correct answer.
Okay.
And don't jump to conclusions based on the first few words you hear.
Right, because sometimes they throw in a curveball
Oh, for sure.
and completely change direction.
Exactly. And be wary of answer choices that contain words or phrases that sound very similar to what the speakers said,
Okay.
but have a slightly different meaning.
Right. Those are the sneaky distractors.
Those are the ones to watch out for.
So it's all about being super attentive to those subtle nuances in language.
It is. It's a real mental workout.
Okay, but what if you're unsure about the answer?
You know, even if you're not 100% sure,
Yeah.
always make a guess.
Okay.
You never know. You might just get lucky.
It's true. Sometimes a little bit of luck can go a long way.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's talk about those map and diagram labeling questions.
Oh, those are fun.
Those feel like a whole different ball game.
They do. They test your spatial awareness
Okay.
and your ability to follow directions,
Right.
which is a different kind of listening skill.
So it's like being a mental GPS,
Exactly.
navigating through the information.
And the key is to familiarize yourself with the map or the diagram
Okay.
before the recording starts.
Okay.
You know, identify the key landmarks and features
Right.
so you know what to listen for.
So you're creating a mental image of the space
Right.
before you even start listening.
Exactly. And then as you listen, pay close attention to prepositions
Okay.
and directional language.
Okay.
Words like north, south, east, west, above, below, left, right.
Right. All those important directional words.
Yeah, they're crucial.
It's like having a mental compass.
Exactly, guiding you through the description.
I like these analogies.
And don't be afraid to draw arrows.
Oh, okay.
Or make little notes on the map or diagram as you listen.
Gotcha.
Anything that helps you visualize the information is going to be helpful.
So it's all about turning those auditory cues
Right.
into visual representations in your mind.
Exactly.
That's really cool.
And with practice, you'll become much more adept at navigating those spatial challenges.
This has been incredibly helpful.
Good.
We've covered so much ground today
We have.
in terms of understanding those different question types
Right.
and like the strategies for actually tackling them.
And don't forget about those multitasking techniques.
Right.
It's like we're building a toolkit for IELTS listening success.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Okay.
I want to touch on something that IELTS Liz mentions about analyzing your mistakes
Okay.
after you take a practice test.
Yeah.
What's the best way to approach that?
That's a great question. And it's actually much more than just seeing where you messed up.
So we were talking about how like analyzing your mistakes after a practice test, it's about more than just seeing where you messed up.
Right. It's not just about dwelling on the negatives. It's
Mhm.
about learning from everything.
Yeah.
Both the good and the bad.
So it's like watching a game replay after a match.
Exactly.
You don't just focus on the fumbles,
Yeah.
you analyze the winning plays too.
want to see what worked.
So we should also look at the questions we did get right.
Absolutely. Because understanding why you got an answer right is just as important as understanding why you got one wrong.
So like, how do we do that?
Well, think about it. Was it a lucky guess?
Right.
Or did you use a specific strategy
Okay.
that worked really well? If you can pinpoint those winning strategies,
Yeah.
you can use them again and again.
It's like building a playbook
Exactly.
for IELTS listening success.
And then for the questions you got wrong,
Okay.
you got to become an IELTS detective.
Ooh, I like that.
Try to figure out why you missed it.
Okay.
Did you mishear something? Did you misunderstand a key word?
Okay.
Or maybe you misread the question.
Or fell for one of those sneaky distractors.
Oh, yeah, those distractors can be tricky.
So many ways to trip up.
There are.
Are there any like common pitfalls that we should be aware of?
Oh, for sure. One of the biggest challenges is just staying focused.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that listening test is a marathon, not a sprint.
Right. It's 40 minutes long.
And all that multitasking can be mentally exhausting.
Yeah. It's like your brain is doing a high workout.
It really is.
So how do we build up that mental stamina?
Well, one thing you can do is practice listening to longer recordings in your everyday life,
Okay. Like what?
like podcasts or audiobooks, and really make a conscious effort to focus on the content, even when your mind starts to wander.
It's like training your attention span like a muscle.
Exactly. Getting it ready for the big game.
What else?
Another common trap is getting bogged down in details.
Okay.
You know, some people try to understand every single word
Right.
instead of focusing on the main ideas.
So instead of trying to memorize the entire script,
Right?
we need to be more like news reporters,
Exactly.
looking for those key headlines.
Just the main points.
And then, of course, we can't forget about the paraphrasing hurdle.
Oh, no. Paraphrasing is always there lurking in the shadows.
So those paraphrasing skills we talked about earlier, super important.
You've got to be able to recognize those reworded phrases.
It's like learning to speak the language of paraphrasing.
I like that.
It can feel overwhelming at first,
It can.
but I think you've given us some really practical tips
I hope so.
to help us prepare.
Yeah, and remember, the more you practice, the more confident you'll become. You'll start to see those patterns, anticipate the tricks,
Right.
and tackle those questions with ease.
This has been such a helpful deep dive
I'm glad you think so.
into the IELTS listening test.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. We went from feeling intimidated to feeling empowered.
That's the goal.
Like we've got this toolkit full of strategies now.
And you do.
So before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about like the technical side of things.
Yeah, all strategies.
But communication is ultimately about connection.
That's a good point.
So as you're prepping for the IELTS,
Yeah.
try to approach the listening test, not just as an exam,
Yeah.
but as an opportunity to connect
I love that.
with the speakers and their ideas.
Yeah, engage with the material.
Engage with it.
With curiosity and an open mind.
Because by truly engaging with the material,
Right?
you'll not only improve your listening skills,
You will.
but you'll also broaden your horizons
Definitely.
and gain new perspectives.
And who knows? You might even discover a new passion along the way.
Exactly. So go forth and listen with intention.
Yes.
And good luck to all our listeners on their IELTS journey.
We're rooting for you.